guys, welcome back to my channel. So yesterday was Father's Day, and in celebration of that, I'm going to be interviewing my dad about his sketchbook.
Hi everyone.
Without further ado, let's go. So Dad, why don't you tell us about your sketchbook?
Okay, so I have a whole bunch of different kinds of sketchbooks, and one of my favorites is these composition books. They're made by Roaring Springs, and they're only about less than $3 a piece. So that's why I like using them, because they're kind of cheap, and the papers are fairly thin, and then it allows me to draw really quickly. And one of the things I like to use on this particular sketchbook are a Prismacolor markers, because it takes the color really well. A Pentel pocket brush pen, which is refillable, and it has the bristles as opposed to the foam tip. And this Pentel Tradio pen, which is also refillable, but it has this cool little kind of like fake little faux fountain pen tip that gives me a lot of cool lines. And I also like the regular microns in different sizes that a lot of people use. And then we also got these brush pens that we picked up on that trip to San Francisco that I like a lot, and they have a bristled tip as well. So those are the pens that I use for this particular sketchbook.
So Dad, what do you like to draw in this sketchbooks?
I like these sketchbooks to just be my general ideas that I have. Every little thing that pops into my head, I try to put down really, really quickly without too much of a underlying construction into these pages. So anything that pops into my head, whether it's Superman feeling super and Batman feeling batty, I just write down, and hopefully it leads to a bigger project or a finished piece later on, which if we show later sketchbooks, I can show you some of the comparisons between what I do in my sketchbook and how it ends up in a finished piece.
So Dad, what were you thinking when you were putting down this idea?
I wasn't thinking about too much other than to try to capture the idea really quickly. So usually if I have an idea, I'll sketch it in, whether it's an idea about the shape of a character's head or a little alien or a shadow or lettering. I just try to put it down as quickly as possible. And this is my happy caveman character. So I just try to do it over and over. And a lot of these characters and a lot of these sketches are based on shapes. So I start doing with shapes. I start seeing how the shape will lead me to a character. I'll start figuring out what the silhouette looks like in these shapes, or how much I can stretch some of these characters to make them really fun. So when I'm trying to sketch in the sketchbook, I'm considering the idea, I'm considering the shape of these characters, and I'm considering the colors. And a lot of the colors that I try to use are pretty much primary colors. I try not to stray away too far from any weird unique colors. I try to stay with like the primary colors, like the reds and the yellows and the blues, and then the farthest I get from that is like the greens and the oranges, which are the mix of red and blue and yellow and red, blue, yellow, and I forgot the other one. Purple. All those primary colors, the complementary colors, that's what I'm trying to say. But you see here, I just start with like a regular shape, like a triangle kind of heads, and how many heads I can make with the triangles, and like square heads, and how I can make a Santa Claus just by simple little shapes. And then these ideas about like people using word balloons to fight each other, and what that means. And it's like how words can hurt people, so it's trying to capture those kinds of ideas.
So who are your influencers when it comes to drawing?
I like a lot of old comic strips and a lot of old cartoons. So when I was a kid, I really, really liked to read every day Snoopy, Peanuts, and Calvin and Hobbes and things like that. But it's also the old Looney Tunes cartoons, Chuck Jones, Tex Avery, Bob Clampett, things like that. And a lot of the Disney stuff as well, the Nine Old Men and all the way up to the modern Disney movies. I also like to look at a lot of comic books. So I like Superman a lot. I like Captain America, Batman, as you can see. So I try to create those characters in fun, different ways. And I also like weird, different stories. I like the ideas of crypto animals. You know what cryptozoology? It's like like animals that may or may not really exist, like
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster or unicorns and things like that. So I like to all that's cryptozoology. So I like to explore a little bit of that. I'm also really influenced by mid-century modern illustrators and designers like uh, Mary Blair and the Eameses and things like that, Charles and Ray Eames. So it's a lot of that kind of influence that gets into my work.
So why do you choose to use these specific tools?
I use the brush pens and the Prismacolor markers because I like the way that they react to this particular paper. I have a different sketchbook that I use a lot of gouache and colored pencils and watercolors and things like that in that we can look at in a future episode. But for this particular book, the pages are so thin and cheap, and I like the way that they suck in and they react to the colored markers and the brush pen. You can see that the page is so thin that you can actually see the other page behind it through it. So when I'm actually coloring, I actually have to put a piece of paper in between the sheets to protect the other pages so that it doesn't get a lot of, the color doesn't bleed through. But I just like the way that these pages in the sketchbook reacts to these markers and brush pens that I'm using.
How would you describe your style in 5 words?
I think in this particular sketchbook, I would say very, very bright and cartoony. In different sketchbooks, it might be totally different because I like to play with different kinds of styles. But in this one, I like to keep it simple, straightforward, and bright and cartoony.
Great. Why don't you just walk us through some of your ideas?
Okay? So, really quickly, again, I just try to get any idea that I have in my head or something I want to do in these sketchbooks as quickly as possible. In this case, with this Superman, I wanted to see if I could change the style just a little bit by when I'm inking the piece, just shaking the pen just a little bit to get me a wobbly kind of like outline. So that's what I was trying to do in that particular piece. I also like to play with a suit so it looks like it's a more realistic kind of like sweatshirt suit as opposed to something a little bit more alien-y like they might have in the movies. But for the most part, I just try to play with different ideas and lettering and colors. If I have an idea for a poster about reading, for instance, how would that come about? So I start generating the ideas here. I had this little character who is kind of like this little yellow character that interacts with different things for a while. I try to explore old characters or create new ones like Football Head. But for the most part, I try just to explore different usages or different ways I can manipulate the pen for my drawings and for my characters and for my lettering. It also allows me to create new stories, new ideas for designs, for final designs. I like to celebrate the city, the area that we live in, which is Orlando here in Florida. And I like to write my kids' names, like your name is right there. And a lot of times especially when you were younger, you used to look at my sketchbook. So I try to leave little surprises for you guys to find. So for instance, if it was some funky little character like Dog Boy, who is a character that I created a long time ago, and he is a superhero who is a dog, and everybody thinks it's a little boy dressed up as a dog, but he's actually a real dog dressed up as a boy, dressed up as a dog. So things like that I kind of leave for you guys to find. And then every now and then I draw a whole little kind of like comic strip for you guys to read. But again, it's just a matter of trying to generate ideas like Ever wonder where cupcakes come from? That's because a cake married a cup and they had little cupcakes, little silly things like that. What does that mean? How different ways I can create the same characters that we all know and love. And, you know, that Superman now leads to this Superman, which is a totally different Superman. But again, we're dealing with shapes, which is this triangle guy, or with just simple, egg heads and things like that. A guy with a book head, we're all bookworms, love to read, and how that would look like. So it's just a matter of exploring with different pens, with different with different markers and different ideas.
So, who are some of your favorite characters to get ideas from?
I really like the old superheroes like Batman and Superman and Captain America and Spider-Man. I like the old classic superheroes. I like being able to interpret them in different ways. I also like Archie and Dan DeCarlo, who is one of my favorite illustrators of Archie. I thought he was the best one, and Harry Lucy, who is another one of the great ones. Sam Schwartz. So it's those old Archie cartoons that I like to read a lot as a kid, and kind of went into my my own characters, and then which caused me to create my own little character. This character here, his name is Billy Bing Bong, which is a character I created when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and he always has a number 10 on his shirt, even though lately I've been exploring with changing that to an 8 for different reasons. And then I have this other little character who's like this little skull guy named Scully, who I draw sometimes. But for the most part, I'm influenced by a lot of the classic characters, comic book characters like Archie's and Superman and the Justice League, and Snoopy and Charlie Brown, and things like that. Tom and Jerry from those old cartoons, and different ways to explore them.
So, how long would it usually take you to finish this type of sketchbook?
This sketchbook usually takes me several months to finish, and sometimes I put it away, and then I don't go back to it for another few months. And by the time I finish and start, because I have sketchbooks in between, or I might leave a lot of my sketching to the iPad Pro and Procreate. It might take me a couple years to finish it, but for the most part, if I was I finished sketchbooks as quickly as a couple months, but my current sketchbook I started almost 2 years ago, and I still haven't finished because I haven't gone back to finish that particular book. But it's just, as long as you're drawing somewhere, I think that's really what's important, is that you just kind of get that out of your system and get those ideas out. So whether they're on a sketchbook, whether they're on there's Billy Bing Bong again, whether they're on a iPad Pro or whatever, it's just important to make sure that you get your ideas out.
So, do you have any words of advice for those who are just starting using sketchbooks?
I think sketchbooks are a great thing to have to generate ideas and to keep ideas, because sometimes we have ideas that we have and then we think we're going to remember and we don't remember, so we forget these great ideas. So I think a sketchbook is a great way to just get your ideas on paper and to also practice. But one of the things you have to remember about sketchbooks is that they're not finished pieces. They are almost a way to just kind of like practice. So if you don't want to show it to anybody, you don't have to show it to somebody. Some people consider sketchbooks like diaries, and they keep it private. Other people share it like we do. We share our pieces, but the important thing is to try not to keep all your images, try not to make them feel like they're too precious, because I don't like to rip pages out unless I absolutely have to. I like to remind myself how a bad drawing could lead to a better drawing. So don't feel that these sketchbooks are overly precious, that you feel that that only great finished pieces have to be in it. Allow yourself to be fluid and loose with your sketchbooks so that they generate great ideas, and they can lead to a lot of great drawings.
Thanks so much for joining us, Dad.
You're welcome. It was fun.
If you want to see more of my dad's work, his links are down in the description. Don't forget to like and comment if you like to see more of my dad's sketchbooks, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!